An old Navy SEAL's grandfather collapsed alone in his apple garden, surrounded by medicine he never ordered. His name was buried in Medicare files, charity papers, and a gift box that smelled like a lie. Then Rin, the FBI German Shepherd, refused to leave one sealed back brace. What he found led to a town's darkest secret. If you believe God still sends loyal paws to protect the forgotten, leave amen. By the time Jessica Ward drove into Silverpine Falls, the morning had already turned the northern hills bright and clean, as if winter had washed the whole town and left it drying under pale spring sunlight. Snow still rested in thin white seams beneath the pine trees, but the roads were clear. The lake beyond Main Street shone like cold glass, and every porch seemed to hold one stubborn pot of early flowers trying to convince the world that warmth was coming. Jessica was 27, young enough that some older agents still watched her like she was an apprentice, but steady enough now that she had learned not to rush into every dark room just because her heart got there first. Her chestnut hair was tied low at the back of her neck, her blue-gray eyes tired but alert, and her dark FBI field jacket sat neatly over a plain sweater, the way duty often sat over the softer parts of her life. Beside her, Rin occupied the back seat like a noble old judge who had not approved of breakfast. He was a 2-year-old German Shepherd, sable-coated, broad-chested, and bright-eyed with a black working harness fitted across his shoulders. His ears missed nothing. His tail spoke only when necessary. And at the moment, his long muzzle rested directly on the paper bag Jessica had placed on the passenger seat. Inside were sugar, free apple turnovers, and a small thermos of decaf coffee for Walter Cole. Rin stared at the bag, as if it might confess. Jessica glanced at him and gave a tired smile. "No, sir. Those are for Mr. Walter, not for the four-legged federal employee." Rin blinked once, unimpressed. It was the closest he came to sarcasm. Jessica had come to Silverpine Falls as an assistant investigator in a preliminary federal review of unusual Medicare claims across several northern counties. The numbers were strange. Elderly patients listed as receiving medical equipment they did not seem to need. Remote appointments stacked too neatly together. Pharmacy shipments that appeared in clusters like geese flying in formation. But numbers alone were cold things. Supervisory Special Agent Marcus Bell, the lead investigator, had warned her the week before that odd data was not enough. They needed a living pattern. A person. A doorway. Jessica understood. Paper could whisper, but it rarely walked into court on its own. Walter Cole was not part of her assignment, at least not officially when she first turned down the narrow road toward his home. He was the grandfather of Ethan Cole, a Navy SEAL and Jessica's longtime friend, the sort of man who could joke through exhaustion, but went silent when he was truly afraid. Ethan had texted her from a training site 2 states away, asking if she could check on Walter while she was in town. The old man had missed 2 calls, then 3. He probably forgot his phone in the shed. Ethan had written, trying to sound casual. Jessica knew him too well. Ethan did not worry out loud unless worry had already been sitting with him for hours. Walter's house stood at the edge of Silverpine Falls, where the town thinned into pine woods and old apple trees. It was a modest cedar home with white trim, a flag folded neatly on the porch rail, and wind chimes made from polished shells that must have come from some warmer coast long ago. Walter himself was 78, a retired Navy mechanic with narrow shoulders, silver hair combed straight back, and hands shaped by decades of patient work. People in town said he could fix an engine by listening to it breathe. They also said he never accepted charity without asking who paid for it, why it was needed, and whether someone else needed it more. That was Walter, proud, kind, and stubborn, in a way that made neighbors both respect him and sneak casseroles onto his porch anyway. Jessica parked near the front walk. The house looked peaceful, almost too peaceful. A radio murmured from somewhere inside, thin and cheerful through the screen door. The back door stood slightly open. That was the first thing that tightened Jessica's stomach. The second was Rin. He did not bark. He did not leap forward. He simply went still, every muscle gathering beneath his coat. His ears rose. His nose moved once toward the open door, then away from it, toward the side yard. Jessica felt the familiar shift inside her, the quiet space where she stopped guessing and started listening to her dog. "Show me," she whispered. A sharp metallic clink broke the soft morning, the sound of something small striking stone, then rolling once into silence. Wren froze beside the garden fence. The wind stopped moving through the apple branches, and for one suspended heartbeat, even the radio inside the house seemed far away. Wren pulled toward the back garden. Jessica followed. One hand near her radio, eyes scanning the porch, the windows, the soft muddy ground beside the stepping stones. Then she saw Walter. He lay on his side beside a raised bed of dark soil, one hand still curled around pruning shears. His face was pale beneath the weathered tan of old outdoor labor, his lips moving without sound. Jessica was beside him in seconds. "Mr. Cole." "Walter, it's Jessica Ward. Ethan sent me." His eyelids fluttered. His breath was faint but present. She called emergency services, gave the address, checked his pulse, and kept her voice calm because panic had never helped anyone breathe. Walter opened his eyes halfway. They were light blue, cloudy with pain and confusion, but still proud. "Didn't order it," he whispered. Jessica leaned closer. "Order what?" His gaze drifted past her, toward the bench under the old apple tree. Wren was standing there now, stiff as a carved wolf, staring at a brown paper bag tucked beneath the bench. Jessica did not touch it, not yet. She looked from where she knelt, and saw the open top, several unopened prescription boxes, white plastic bottles, folded delivery papers, and a medical back brace, still sealed in clear packaging, with a bright shipping label on the side. "Help is coming," Jessica told Walter. "Stay with me," he swallowed, trying to gather himself from some foggy place inside. Lady called. "Mercy Bridge. Said Medicare covered it. Said doctor changed my pills." His hand trembled around the pruning shears. Jessica gently eased the tool away and placed it where it could not hurt him. "Did you speak to your doctor?" Walter's mouth tightened with the old embarrassment of a man who hated needing help. "Thought I did, thought maybe I forgot." Those 3 words landed harder than any accusation. Jessica had heard fear in many forms, but the fear of an elderly person doubting his own mind carried a special sorrow. It was quiet. It apologized for itself. It made room for thieves wearing smiles. The paramedics arrived 6 minutes later, led by a broad young woman named Dana Ruiz, whose dark braids swung over one shoulder and whose calm brown eyes took in the scene quickly. Dana treated Walter with the efficient gentleness of someone who had seen proud old men try to stand when they should not. "Sir, you can argue with me at the hospital," she said, checking his vitals, "but you have to get there first." Walter gave the faintest huff. It was almost a laugh. Jessica stepped back, giving them room, while Wren remained near the bench, his gaze fixed on the bag. Jessica photographed only what was visible from where she stood: the bag under the bench, the sealed brace, the delivery label, the top page of a Medicare, notice peeking from between 2 boxes. She did not search the house. She did not take the bag. She did not turn a personal emergency into a private investigation. When Walter was lifted carefully onto the stretcher, he caught her sleeve with surprising strength. "Tell Ethan, I'm not helpless," he whispered. Jessica placed her hand over his. "I'll tell him you're stubborn. He already knows the rest." After the ambulance pulled away, Jessica called Marcus Bell. He answered on the second ring. N.G. Bell was 46. A supervisory special agent with close-cropped hair touched with gray, a square jaw that seemed built for long silences, and the kind of voice that made people sit straighter without knowing why. He was not unkind, but he trusted procedure the way some men trusted prayer. Jessica reported the scene, the medical equipment, Walter's statement, and the Mercy Bridge name. She sent the photographs exactly as taken. Bell was quiet for several seconds. "Do not collect anything else without instruction," he said. "Secure what you can by consent once the family is present. I'll run Cole's name against the claim cluster." Jessica looked toward the apple trees, where Wren still stood, watching the bag like it had breathed wrong. "Yes, sir." Bell's voice softened by half an inch. "Word, this may be the doorway." At the hospital, Jessica called Ethan. For once, he had no joke ready. He listened without interruption, and when she explained that Walter's name might be tied to suspicious Medicare claims, his breathing changed. Ethan Cole was 32, tall and lean, with sandy brown hair usually cut short, a tired soldier's posture, and eyes that could turn gentle or storm, dark depending on who was standing in front of him. Walter had raised him after his parents were gone from his daily life, and Jessica heard that history in the silence before he spoke. "I'm requesting emergency family leave," he said. "I'm coming home." By early afternoon, Walter was stable but weak. The brown paper bag had been temporarily sealed and documented under Belle's instructions, pending Walter's consent and Ethan's arrival. Jessica sat in the hospital waiting area beneath white fluorescent lights that made everyone look more fragile than they were. Rin lay under her chair, his head on his paws. Every few minutes, his ears lifted toward the sealed evidence bag, resting with hospital security nearby. Then Belle called again. His voice carried no drama, which made the words feel heavier. "Walter Cole is not alone," he said. "His name appears in the same billing pattern as more than 40 elderly residents in Silver Pine Falls." Jessica looked down at Rin, then at the photograph on her phone, the unused back brace, clean sealed, and shining under the apple tree light. A free gift had begun to look like a key, and somewhere beyond it waited a room no one had wanted opened. Walter Cole woke beneath the soft beep of hospital machines and the tired glow of afternoon light slipping through the blinds. His face had regained a little color, though his silver hair lay mussed against the pillow, and his hands, those old mechanic's hands that once knew the language of engines better than most men knew prayer, trembled when he tried to lift the paper cup beside him. Jessica Ward stood near the foot of his bed with Rin sitting at her left side, the sable German shepherd still as a church statue, amber eyes watching every movement in the room. The doctor had already explained the first hard truth. Walter's condition had worsened because his medication schedule had been disrupted. He had missed one necessary pill and taken several new ones from the brown paper bag, believing they had come from a real medical update. The lie had not arrived with thunder. It had arrived in a friendly phone call. By evening, Ethan Cole came through the hospital doors carrying the cold with him. He was 32, tall and lean, with sandy brown hair cut close, a square jaw darkened by a day of travel, and the quiet posture of a man trained to remain calm, even when his heart had already run ahead of him. His olive field jacket still smelled faintly of airport air, rain, and the metal seats of too many waiting rooms. When he saw Walter asleep in the hospital bed, something in his face softened so sharply that Jessica had to look away for a second. Ethan placed one hand on the bed rail, his fingers shook once, then stilled. That was his way. Pain passed through him like weather over stone, visible only if a person knew where to look. Jessica stepped into the hallway with him and spoke gently but clearly. "Ethan, you can be here as family. You can help your grandfather, help us understand his routines, and introduce us to people who choose to talk. But you cannot investigate for us. You cannot confront anyone. You cannot touch evidence." Ethan looked through the window at Walter, his eyes dark with restraint. "I know." His voice was low, sanded down by worry. "I can stand down, Jess, but I can't stand away." Rin, as if understanding the border between duty and love, pressed his shoulder lightly against Ethan's leg. Ethan looked down and let out one breath that almost became a laugh. "Yeah, buddy, I know. You're the calm one." Supervisory Special Agent Marcus Bell arrived before sunrise. He was 46, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped hair touched by gray, and a face built from clean lines and long patience. He wore a dark coat, carried a worn leather folder, and had a habit of looking at rooms before looking at people, as if the walls might speak first. Bell was not cold, exactly. He was careful. Years of healthcare investigations had taught him that sympathy could open doors, but only evidence kept them open. He listened to Jessica's report without interruption, reviewed the photographs, then looked at Rin. "Your dog may find the first loose thread," he said, "but we still need the whole cloth." Jessica nodded. She respected that. Rin could point to what felt wrong. Jessica and Bell had to prove why it mattered. Walter gave consent for the FBI to review the bag, the unused brace, the visible Medicare papers, and a small stack of notices he had kept in a kitchen drawer. Ethan signed as family support, not as an investigator. It was important, and Bell made sure everyone understood it. From Walter's halting account, they learned the name that kept returning like a church bell in Fog Mercy Bridge Senior Fund. A woman calling herself a care coordinator had phoned Walter twice, maybe 3 times. She had a sweet voice, he said, the kind that called him Mr. Cole, like she had known him all her life. She told him his Medicare benefits covered new support equipment, updated pain medication, and a safer home care plan. She said, refusing. It might delay help for others on the waiting list. Walter had believed her because Mercy Bridge was not a stranger in Silver Pine Falls. It was everywhere. Mercy Bridge delivered hot meals during winter storms. Mercy Bridge handed out grocery cards after Sunday service. Mercy Bridge drove older residents to appointments in a white van with a blue dove painted on the side, and Councilman Grant Hollis praised the fund at every town meeting. Hollis had the polished smile of a man who knew where every camera stood. But to Silver Pine's elderly residents, he seemed like a son of the town made good warm handshake, wool coat, careful words, always standing beside someone's grandmother when the local paper took photographs. The hospital vending machine suddenly dropped a can with a hard metallic crack, and Walter flinched in his bed before anyone spoke. The room held still. Wren rose halfway, ears sharp, while Walter stared at the sealed bag of medicine, as if the sound had come from inside it. That small flinch told Jessica more than Walter's pride would allow him to say. The old man was not just ill. He was frightened by the possibility that his own trust had opened the door. A person could recover from a bad pill schedule. It was harder to recover from being made to feel foolish. Jessica had seen that wound before in the elderly. It was quiet, almost polite, and it hid beneath sentences like, "Maybe I misunderstood." Later that morning, Jessica, Belle, and Wren went to Maple Lantern Court, the senior housing complex, where several names from Belle's data cluster appeared. Ethan came along, but he stayed in the common areas, speaking only as Walter's grandson and an old neighbor. Maple Lantern Court sat on a sunlit corner near the Methodist church, a cheerful brick building with white balconies, red geranium pots, plastic chairs in the hallways, and an old country radio playing softly from someone's open door. The place smelled of coffee, lemon cleaner, and the faint powdery sweetness of hard candy. Mabel Henson lived in apartment 2B. She was 81, round-faced and small, with soft brown skin, white curls pinned close to her head, and a lavender sweater that made her look like a spring flower refusing to fade. Her eyes were lively, though they carried the guarded caution of someone who had been asked too many questions by people in offices. She knew Ethan, and that helped. "Little Ethan Cole," she said, touching his sleeve. "You got tall enough to block my sunlight." Ethan smiled for the first time since arriving. "Yes, ma'am. Walter says I was always inconvenient that way." Mabel admitted she had received gift cards from Mercy Bridge after accepting several medications and a knee brace she barely used. "They said it was part of the benefit," she told Jessica. "Said if I didn't take it, the funding might go down. I thought I was helping keep the program alive." Her voice grew smaller. "Was that wrong?" Jessica crouched, so she did not tower over her. "You were trying to trust the people who said they were helping you. That is not wrong." Wren moved toward Mabel's kitchen and stopped before a lower cabinet. Jessica asked permission before opening it. Inside were unopened medication boxes, 2 sealed support sleeves, and another package bearing the same packing tape and warehouse odor as Walter's bag. Wren did not bark. He simply sat, eyes fixed on the boxes, his body speaking the way a compass speaks north. Belle photographed the items and made careful notes. "Pattern," he said softly, not as a conclusion, but as a door beginning to open. Back in the hallway, Jessica reviewed a printed list Belle's analyst had sent over. One name halted her hand, Eleanor Price. The file said Eleanor had received a remote consultation and a new knee brace the previous week. A neighbor passing by heard the name and stopped. He was a thin man named Arlo Finch, with stooped shoulders, watery blue eyes, and a gray cardigan buttoned wrong. "Miss Eleanor," he said. "She's been resting with her husband at Cedar Hill Cemetery since February." Belle's expression did not change, but his pen stopped moving. Jessica felt the air cool around the paper in her hand. A woman gone for more than 2 months had somehow attended a fresh remote appointment and received new equipment. Wren stood beside the unopened boxes, tail still, ears forward, as if listening to paper breathe. Belle took out his phone and called the analysis team. "Expand the cluster," he said. "Every patient connected to Mercy Bridge, North Star Pharmacy, and any remote consult tied to Silver Pine Falls." Jessica looked down the bright hallway at Maple Lantern Court, where the unopened boxes sat neatly in Mabel's kitchen, like late Christmas gifts. But Wren did not wag his tail. He watched them as if a flock of paper birds had just flown out of a lie. By the next morning, Silverpine Falls looked almost too gentle for the kind of trouble Jessica Ward was beginning to see. Sunlight rested on the wet sidewalks of Main Street. Small flags stirred above storefronts. A bakery door opened and breathed cinnamon into the cold air. People crossed the street with paper coffee cups in hand, nodding to neighbors as if the whole town had agreed to remain innocent for one more day. But Jessica had learned that a town could wear kindness like a Sunday coat while something colder moved underneath. The data from Marcus Bell's team arrived just after 7. Walter Cole, Mabel Henson, and Eleanor Price all shared the same path on paper: Mercy Bridge Senior Fund, a remote consultation, and then North Star Family Pharmacy. The name sounded harmless, almost comforting. North Star stood near the center of Main Street in a pale blue building with white trim, 2 flower pots by the door, and a hand-painted sign that read, "Caring for Silverpine, one family at a time." If a person judged by windows, the pharmacy looked like the sort of place where an old man could forget his wallet and still leave with his medicine. Jessica stood across the street with Wren beside her. The 2-year-old German Shepherd was calm, sable coat shining under the thin northern sun, black harness snug across his shoulders. His ears tracked the morning traffic, but his gaze kept returning to the alley beside the pharmacy. Wren had no interest in slogans. He believed in air, footsteps, tape, plastic, human nervousness, and the little changes people left behind when they thought only God and janitors were watching. Marcus Bell joined her at the curb, dark coat buttoned, leather folder under one arm. He looked at the sign, then at the delivery entrance in the alley. "We go in clean," he said. "Questions first. Consent where possible. No fishing." Jessica nodded. Bell did not need to say the rest. Wren might find the thread, but they still needed legal hands to pull it. Ethan Cole did not come with them. That had been decided before breakfast. He stayed at the hospital with Walter, gathering medication lists, old appointment cards, and the names of Walter's real doctors. Ethan had not liked it. Jessica could see that in the way he held his jaw when she explained it. But he had listened. He was a soldier. Discipline was not the absence of feeling. Sometimes it was the cage that kept feeling from ruining what mattered. Inside North Star, warm air carried the scents of lotion, paper bags, antiseptic wipes, and peppermint candy. A bell chimed above the door. Behind the counter stood Lydia Vance, the owner. She was in her early 50s, tall and narrow in a cream cardigan, with smooth auburn hair tucked behind one ear and pearl earrings that caught the light whenever she turned her head. Her face had the careful softness of someone who knew how to comfort people before they asked for it. Her smile arrived quickly, but Jessica noticed it left her eyes a fraction too soon. "Agent Bell," Lydia said, reading his badge before he introduced himself. Her voice was mild, practiced, and pleasant enough to make suspicion feel impolite. "Agent Ward, how can North Star help?" Bell explained the review in simple terms. Lydia folded her hands on the counter and listened with a sympathetic tilt of the head. "We serve many seniors," she said. "Some of them forget what their doctors ordered. We try to be patient. Aging can be confusing for families." Jessica felt that sentence brush against her like a cold sleeve. It sounded kind. It also quietly blamed the patients. When asked about Walter Cole, Lydia's expression softened even more. "Mr. Cole is a dear man. If something was delivered incorrectly, we would want to correct that immediately." She pulled up records with graceful fingers and showed them a shipment marked delivered, support brace, pain cream, medication refills, all tied to a remote physician order. "We don't prescribe," she said. "We process valid orders from physicians and approved telemedicine providers." Jessica watched her hands. They moved too smoothly. No hesitation. No surprise. No search for an explanation. Lydia spoke like a woman walking a path she had rehearsed in the dark. From the back room came a sudden rip of packing tape, sharp as a small scream in the clean pharmacy air. Wren's head snapped toward the sound. For one breath, everyone stopped pretending the morning was ordinary. A young clerk stepped into view, holding an empty box. He was barely 20, thin, with sandy hair falling over nervous eyes, and a name tag that read Caleb. "Sorry," he muttered. Lydia turned her head slowly. Her smile stayed in place, but the warmth left it. "Caleb, please finish later." The young man disappeared behind the swinging door too quickly. Rin did not sit. He remained standing, body angled toward the back, nose working. Bell noticed. "Mrs. Vance, we'd like to view your shipping and receiving area." Lydia paused just long enough for Jessica to hear the pause. Then she smiled again. "Of course, we have nothing to hide." The receiving room was small, neat, and lined with shelves of sealed boxes. Shipping labels lay in tidy stacks near a printer. A metal cart stood beside the rear door, and beyond it, through a narrow window, Jessica could see the alley and a row of flattened cardboard waiting near the bins. Bell asked basic questions. Lydia answered them all. Yes, deliveries sometimes came in batches. Yes, some patients preferred pickup. Yes, Mercy Bridge volunteers occasionally helped seniors collect packages. Every answer made sense alone. Together, they were beginning to form a wall. With Lydia's consent, Bell reviewed the visible shipping logs. Jessica photographed labels connected to the patients already identified. Rin walked slowly along the lower shelves, then stopped near the rear door. His nose pressed toward the gap beneath it. His tail went still. Outside, in the alley, Bell limited the search to discarded materials accessible from the public waste area. Caleb stood by the door, looking as if he wished he could shrink into his own sweater. Jessica glanced at him kindly, but did not press. Fear often spoke later, after it had found a safer room. Rin pulled toward a flattened carton partly tucked behind a recycling bin. Jessica crouched, but did not touch, until Bell gave a nod and gloves were on. On the cardboard, half a torn label remained. Most of the address had been stripped away, but the name was clear, Walter Cole. Below it, the delivery location did not match Walter's house. It showed North Star's rear storage entrance. Bell's pen stopped again, the way it had at Maple Lantern Court. Jessica felt a quiet click inside the case. Walter had been billed for items marked delivered, yet one of his labels had never left the pharmacy's own back door. Around the bin were more torn strips, partial names, Medicare, related routing codes, and bits of adhesive with the same warehouse smell Rin had followed from Walter's garden to Mabel's cabinet. Lydia stepped into the alley. "Returned packaging," she said quickly. "Sometimes seniors bring boxes back for disposal." Bell looked at the label in Jessica's gloved hand. "Mr. Cole has been in the hospital since yesterday." Lydia's lips parted, then closed. For the first time, the practiced path seemed to have a missing stone. Later, at the hospital, Ethan confirmed what Jessica already suspected, but Bell made sure it was recorded properly. Walter did not accept expensive medical equipment without speaking to Ethan or his longtime primary doctor. He disliked gift cards, too, said they made him feel like somebody was paying him to say thank you, Ethan said, standing beside Walter's bed, with his arms folded tightly. Bell wrote it down, then looked at Jessica. Supporting context, not proof by itself. Jessica nodded. Ethan heard it, too. His anger moved behind his eyes, but he kept his voice even. "Then find the proof." The proof began to point beyond North Star. Bell's analyst sent another report before sunset. Many North Star orders were tied to Bright Path Pain and Wellness, a local clinic specializing in chronic pain management. The same patient names appeared again and again, attached to pain creams, support braces, urine tests, follow-up evaluations, and remote medical approvals. Some appointments were separated by only minutes. Some patients did not remember speaking to a doctor at all. Jessica traced the signatures through the system and found the name Dr. Adrian Sloan. He was a telemedicine physician whose electronic approval appeared on dozens of orders from Silverpine Falls. But Bell's team confirmed one crucial detail. Sloan's telemedicine privileges had been suspended nearly a month earlier. His signature should not have appeared on new orders. Bell leaned back in the motel room chair that night, the blue light of Jessica's laptop cutting shadows across his face. Either his credentials were retained, copied or used through a platform that didn't shut him down. Jessica looked at the map she had drawn in her notebook. Mercy Bridge to Bright Path. Bright Path to Dr. Sloan. Sloan to North Star. North Star to Medicare. "It's not one greedy pharmacy," she said. Belle's eyes remained on the screen. No, it's a chain. After Belle left to call the analysis team, Jessica sat alone at the small motel desk. Outside, a truck hissed over wet pavement. Inside, the heater clicked softly, pushing dry warmth into the room. Rin came over and placed his muzzle on her notebook, covering the torn label photo as if closing a case file for the night. Jessica laughed under her breath, the first light sound she had made all day. She rubbed the fur between his ears. 5 minutes, she promised, then we keep going. She lifted the photo again and stared at the word printed across the damaged label, delivered. There were things in Silver Pine Falls that had never reached the hands of the people who needed them, but their bills had traveled beautifully, cleanly, and without shame, straight into the heart of the system. Bright Path Pain and Wellness sat on the lake road, where Silver Pine Falls began to loosen its little town grip and give way to water, pine trees, and the pale blue distance of northern spring. The clinic was painted cream with green shutters, and its front windows were washed so clean they reflected the sky like promises. Inside, the waiting room smelled of lavender cleaner, warm paper, and coffee kept too long. On a hot plate, framed prints of quiet forests lined the walls. A wooden bowl of wrapped mints sat on the reception desk. Everything about the place seemed designed to tell an elderly person, "You are safe here." Jessica Ward had learned that the most dangerous rooms were sometimes the ones with the softest chairs. Dr. Nolan Mercer came out to greet them himself. He was 59 tall but slightly stooped at the shoulders, with silver hair combed neatly back and a trimmed gray beard that made him look more like a kindly professor than a clinic director. His skin was pale from indoor work, his blue eyes calm, and his hands moved with gentle precision, as if he were used to touching pain without disturbing it. He wore a white coat over a charcoal sweater, and his voice carried the polished warmth of a man who had spoken at many fundraisers. "Agent Bell, Agent Ward, we always cooperate with lawful review. The elderly deserve transparency." His smile rested on Jessica a second longer than necessary. A town is only as healthy as the elders it remembers. Marcus Bell did not smile back. "Then we'll start with the records Bright Path created for Walter Cole." Mercer led them into a conference room where a young receptionist set down water bottles and a folder of printed forms. The receptionist, a slim woman in her 20s named Hannah Pike, had strawberry blonde hair pulled into a careful bun and nervous freckles across her nose. She avoided looking at Rin. Rin sat beside Jessica's chair, sable coat bright beneath the fluorescent light, black harness still, eyes gentle but watchful. He was not there to frighten anyone. That was never his gift. Rin's gift was noticing when a room changed its breathing. The files showed Walter had visited Bright Path twice the previous year for mild joint discomfort after winter yard work. In Walter's memory, both visits had been simple: a brief exam, a recommendation for rest, a reminder to call his primary doctor if the ache worsened. But the later records told a different story. On paper, Walter became a chronic pain patient requiring repeated evaluations, medication monitoring, support equipment, and follow-up services he did not remember. There were notes describing discomfort he had never reported, limitations he had never claimed, and treatment plans he had never discussed. Jessica felt anger rise, but she kept her pen moving. Anger could warm the hand, but it made poor handwriting. At the hospital the night before, she had found Walter's Medicare summary notices tucked into an old envelope Ethan brought from the house. Walter had circled several lines in blue ink. Beside one charge, he had written in small, shaky letters, "Did I forget this?" That note stayed with Jessica longer than the amount billed. The money mattered, the pattern mattered, but that small question was the wound. Someone had not only used Walter's name, they had made him doubt his own mind. Bell reviewed the records with Mercer. Why was Mr. Cole categorized as long-term chronic pain management after 2 minor visits? Mercer's expression did not break. Clinical judgment can evolve. Elderly patients often underreport symptoms. Jessica looked up. Walter Cole underreports many things: pain, fear, hunger, how much he misses his wife, but he does not invent medical equipment he never opened. Mercer blinked once. A tiny pause. Then the professional sorrow returned. "I understand the family is upset." "The family is not the evidence," Bell said. "The records are." Outside the clinic, Ethan waited by his truck because he had agreed not to enter. He was leaning against the hood with his arms folded, broad shoulders stiff beneath his field jacket, jaw tight as a locked gate. 8. When Jessica and Belle came out, Ethan straightened. "Tell me he had an explanation." Jessica did not answer quickly enough. Ethan turned toward the clinic door. "I'm going in." Jessica stepped in front of him. "No." His eyes sharpened. "That man put my grandfather into a file like he was spare parts." "I know." "He made him think he was losing his memory." "I know." "Then let me ask him one question." Belle's voice came from behind her, level and firm. "If you confront Mercer, his attorney will turn you into the story. Angry SEAL threatens respected local doctor." "That helps him, not Walter." Ethan stood very still. The wind moved through the pines beside the parking lot. For a moment, Jessica saw the battle inside him. Love pulling one way, discipline pulling the other. At last he stepped back. "Then tell me what I can do." Jessica softened. "Find Walter's real appointment cards, his old doctor's number, photos from last year, anything showing how he actually lived." Ethan swallowed hard. "I can do that." A church bell rang from downtown, sudden and deep, rolling across the lake road like a bronze wave. Ethan closed his eyes at the sound, and for one breath, all the anger in him seemed to bow its head. That bell followed them into the afternoon. Bell drove Jessica to a small diner near the Methodist church, where he spread printouts across a corner booth and drank black coffee as if it were medicine. Jessica studied him in the quiet between pages. Marcus Bell carried himself like a man who had built walls and then labeled them procedure. Yet there were moments when his eyes lingered on the elderly names too long. "Why healthcare fraud?" Jessica asked. Bell did not answer at first. He tapped his pen against one line item, then stopped. "My mother was sold a treatment plan she didn't need. Years ago, different state, different clinic. Nothing dramatic enough for headlines." His jaw shifted slightly. But the bills came, the confusion came, the shame came. She kept saying she should have known better. He looked up. "People think paperwork can't hurt the elderly. They're wrong." Jessica said nothing. Some truths deserved a little silence around them. Near dusk, a message came from an unknown number behind Grace Methodist. "After choir practice, come alone if you want to know why Walter was chosen." Bell insisted on staying within sight. Jessica agreed. Alone did not mean foolish. Grace Methodist stood on a rise above town, white steeple glowing against the lavender evening sky. The parking lot smelled of damp leaves and candle wax drifting from an open side door. Rin walked at Jessica's heel, quiet as shadow. A woman stepped from beneath the yellow security light behind the church. She was in her early 60s, short and sturdy, with iron-gray hair cut blunt at her chin, brown eyes ringed with sleeplessness, and a nurse's old habit of comfortable shoes. Her name was Paula Wynne. Jessica recognized it from Bright Path's staffing list. Paula held a small tin of peppermint candies in both hands like an offering. "I knew Walter's wife," Paula said before Jessica asked. Her voice trembled, but not from weakness. It trembled from the strain of having carried truth too long. "Evelyn used to bring soup to the clinic when my husband was sick. Walter fixed my furnace, one winter, and refused payment." She looked toward the church wall. "When I saw his name on the easy list, I couldn't sleep." "The easy list?" Jessica asked. Paula opened the candy tin. Beneath the mints lay a small USB drive. Patients who lived alone. Patients with Medicare. People who trusted Mercy Bridge. People who wouldn't argue if a nice voice told them a doctor had approved something. Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back. Bright Path sent them through North Star. Then Care Halo Connect handled the remote signatures. Mercy Bridge fed the names in. And Councilman Hollis made sure nobody local asked too many questions. Jessica accepted the tin with gloved hands. "Hollis doesn't control Medicare." "No," Paula whispered. "He controls the town. The grants, the inspections, the public trust. He helped Mercy Bridge get community funds after the pandemic. Some contracts went to companies tied to his nephew. Consulting, outreach, transportation that never happened." Rin shifted beside Jessica, nose lifting toward Paula's coat pocket. Paula noticed and gave a sad little smile. "He knows I came from the clinic. Dogs are honest that way." From the church basement, Voices rose in the last line of a hymn, soft and wavering but full of stubborn hope. Paula looked toward the sound, then back at Jessica. "Walter Cole was not the first," she said. "He was only the first one your dog refused to ignore." When Paula walked away beneath the yellow church light, Rin stood very still at Jessica's side. In the small peppermint tin, the whole town seemed to begin trembling. The USB drive Paula Wynne had hidden beneath peppermint candies did not stay in Jessica Ward's hands for long. By sunrise, it was sealed, logged, and moving through the federal analysis team under Marcus Bell's chain of custody. Jessica did not try to become the whole investigation by herself. She was the assistant investigator, and she knew the strength of her role: protect the witness, connect the living details to the paper trail, and make sure no small human truth got buried under spreadsheets. In a temporary conference room above the Silver Pine Falls Municipal Library, she watched analysts build the map on a screen. Mercy Bridge gathered elderly names. Bright Path shaped medical reasons. North Star moved prescriptions and equipment. And one bright blue box sat in the center, like a spider in a clean glass jar: Care Halo Connect. Care Halo Connect was run by Victor Raines, a 38-year-old technology executive with a slim frame, sharp cheekbones, dark hair combed back too perfectly, and the restless eyes of a man who liked rooms better when he controlled the lights. His company website showed him standing in a glass house by the lake, sleeves rolled up, smiling beside phrases like "care without distance" and "medicine for forgotten communities." On video, he spoke with polished sincerity, the kind that sounded almost musical until Jessica listened twice. He said technology could help seniors in remote places. He said no grandmother should be left waiting for a doctor. He said compassion needed speed. Jessica wrote one line in her notebook: "Speed can also help a lie travel." Bell stood beside her, arms folded, face unreadable. "We already had the claim anomaly," he said. "Paula's files give us internal structure. Walter gives us harm. The fake delivery labels give us movement. Now we test the machine." The test was simple, legal, and careful. A federal agent would pose as a Medicare patient responding to a Care Halo outreach call. Jessica would assist with observation notes. Bell would handle the approvals. Rin would remain outside the digital part of the operation. There was no scent on a phone screen, no trail for a dog inside software. Rin's work would come later, where people still had to stack boxes, peel labels, and hide what they wished the world would not see. The undercover patient was Special Agent Leona Park, a woman in her early 40s with straight black hair, cut at her jaw, calm dark eyes, and a soft voice that could sound elderly without becoming theatrical. She had spent years working financial cases, and Jessica liked her immediately because Leona did not perform confidence. She simply carried it. She sat at a table with a phone, a notepad, and a cup of tea growing cold beside her. When Care Halo's representative called, Leona answered with mild uncertainty, saying she had occasional stiffness after gardening, but no serious injury, no recent examination, and no doctor visit scheduled. The call lasted less than 7 minutes. No video, no physical exam, no meaningful medical history. The representative, a cheerful woman who never gave a full last name, promised that a licensed provider would review the eligibility. Then the line went quiet. 3 hours later, the printer in the corner woke with a sudden electric whine, spitting out page after page into the silent room. Jessica turned toward the sound. The first sheet slid forward, warm and fresh, carrying a doctor's signature for an examination that had never happened. No one spoke at first. The room felt colder, though the heater was on. Leona lifted the report and read it aloud. According to Care Halo, she had received a complete remote evaluation. The notes claimed she had limited mobility, recurring back discomfort, knee instability, and difficulty standing for long periods. None of that had been said. The system recommended a back brace, knee support, compounded pain cream, and a follow-up review through BrightPath. Jessica thought of Walter's blue ink question, "Did I forget this?" and felt the quiet sorrow of it settle in her chest again. This was how the trick worked. Not with a dark hallway, not with shouting, with clean fonts, friendly phrases, and a signature placed where a human conversation should have been. Bell read the report once, then handed it to the evidence technician. "Now we move on the warehouse." The Care Halo storage site sat behind an office park north of town, near a frozen drainage pond where red-winged blackbirds clung to reeds and sang as if spring had paid them in advance. The building itself was plain, gray metal siding, loading dock, white company van, security camera above the rear door. With the proper order in hand, Bell's team entered calmly. Jessica followed with Rin at heel. The German shepherd moved slowly, nose low, his sable coat catching stripes of light from the warehouse windows. Rows of medical equipment boxes stood stacked and labeled. At first glance, the place looked orderly enough to bore a jury. Then Rin stopped. He angled toward the rear of the warehouse, where a wall of flattened cartons leaned too neatly against steel shelves. His ears lifted. His nostrils moved. Jessica did not rush him. Rin stepped once, then twice, and pressed his nose near the bottom edge of the cardboard wall. Beneath the clean smell of plastic packaging was something older. Dust, torn adhesive, hidden wood, and the same warehouse tape that had followed them from Walter's garden to Mabel's cabinet to North Star's alley. Bell, Jessica said softly. The technicians checked the area. The carton wall shifted. Behind it was a narrow storage pocket packed with unopened equipment, back braces, knee braces, support sleeves, and sealed boxes carrying patient names. Some were marked as delivered weeks earlier. Walter Cole's name appeared on one. Mabel Henson's appeared on another. Eleanor Price's appeared on a box that should never have been prepared for a woman who had already passed away months before. Jessica looked at Rin. He sat calmly, not triumphant, not excited. He had found a door. The people would have to decide what justice did with it. By evening, the financial path began to show itself. Medicare claims flowed to pharmacies and clinics, then moved through consulting fees, outreach contracts, transportation invoices, and media services that seemed to exist mostly on paper. One trail led to a company connected to the nephew of Councilman Grant Hollis. Bell called it carefully. This is no longer only healthcare fraud. We are looking at bribery and misuse of public funds. At the hospital, Walter listened from his bed, thinner than before but clearer. He remembered Hollis visiting his garden months earlier with a folder and a smile, saying Mercy Bridge needed community signatures to keep funding for seniors. Walter had trusted him. Hollis had spoken at Evelyn's memorial service. He had quoted scripture, held Walter's hand, and called him a pillar of Silverpine Falls. Ethan stood beside the window while Walter spoke. He did not shout. He simply placed one hand against the wall and leaned into it as if holding up the building. Jessica followed him into the hall. She did not offer easy comfort. Rin walked over and placed his head beneath Ethan's open hand. The SEAL looked down, his jaw tight, his eyes shining with a grief he refused to drop. "I want to break something," he whispered. Jessica answered gently. "Then don't. That is how we keep them from breaking this case." Ethan closed his fingers in Rin's fur, breathed once, and nodded. "I'll do it right." Near midnight, Bell's analyst found the folder in Care Halo's data system. Hollis Community Access Pilot. Inside were patient lists, public grant contracts, consulting payments, and notes identifying people who were easy to persuade. Walter's name sat in the middle, no longer an old man with an apple garden, no longer the neighbor who fixed engines for free. In that false system of mercy, he had become a line to sign, a claim to send, and money waiting to be taken. Silverpine Falls looked beautiful enough that morning to fool a stranger. The town square had been dressed in small blue and white flags, white tents, apple pies cooling on folding tables, and paper cups of lemonade sweating in the early spring sun. Children ran around the fountain with sticky fingers. Elderly couples sat beneath canvas shade, while the church choir warmed up near the gazebo, their voices rising soft and bright into the clean northern air. If kindness could be painted, the square might have been its portrait. That was what made Jessica Ward's stomach tighten. Some lies did not hide in darkness. Some stood in daylight with a ribbon on their chest. Mercy Bridge Senior Fund had called the event, "A Day for Our Forgotten Elders." The banner stretched across the stage in cheerful letters, and volunteers in pale blue shirts moved through the crowd handing out brochures. Jessica stood at the edge of the square beside Marcus Bell, who wore a dark suit instead of his field coat, and looked even more severe under the sunshine. Rin sat at Jessica's left, sable coat brushed, black harness fitted close, amber eyes calm but alert, The German shepherd did not watch the stage. He watched movement. Hands passing envelopes, shoes near the donation table. A white van parked too close to the alley behind the courthouse. Bell's team already had the warrants that mattered. The case did not rest on a dog's instinct or a dramatic morning surprise. It rested on Medicare claims, the undercover patient report, Paula Wynn's internal files, the warehouse equipment, North Star's delivery labels, Bright Path's altered patient records, and the public fund contracts connected to Councilman Grant Hollis. Today was not fishing. Today was closing a net that had taken 3 weeks, too many elderly names, and one stubborn dog to tighten. Grant Hollis stood near the stage greeting people as if he had personally invented gratitude. He was 61, tall and broad through the shoulders, with silver hair swept back from a handsome face, sun-browned skin, and a smile polished by years of campaign photographs. His navy blazer fit perfectly. His handshake lingered just long enough to look sincere. To the crowd, he was the town's favorite son, the man who attended every memorial service, remembered birthdays, and called older women ma'am, with a hand over his heart to Jessica. He was a man standing on a carpet woven from other people's trust. Dr. Nolan Mercer stood beside him in a pale linen jacket, his trimmed gray beard and gentle eyes still shaped into that medical kindness he wore so well. Lydia Vance had chosen a cream dress and pearls, looking like a woman who might have brought soup to everyone's grandmother. Victor Raines, sharp and restless in a charcoal suit, with no tie, kept checking his phone, his smile flashing on and off like a screen with a weak signal. They did not look frightened. That told Jessica they still believed the story could be managed. Walter Cole arrived in a wheelchair pushed by Ethan. The old man wore a blue cardigan over a white shirt, his silver hair combed neatly, his face thinner than it had been in the garden, but steadier now. He had insisted on coming, not as a prop, not as bait. He had come because a name deserved to stand upright even when the body needed wheels. Ethan Cole walked behind him, tall, lean, and silent, his sandy brown hair trimmed close, his jaw set with the discipline of a man holding a storm in both hands. He had promised Jessica he would not interfere. Still, when his eyes found Hollis, his shoulders tightened. Wren rose once, stepped toward him, and pressed his head briefly against Ethan's hand. Ethan looked down, took one breath, and let his fingers rest in the dog's fur. A microphone shrieked across the square, high and sudden, slicing through the choir's warm-up notes. Pigeons burst from the courthouse roof in a flutter of gray wings, and for one suspended second, every smiling face turned toward the stage. Hollis laughed into the pause. Well, even the sound system is excited to honor our seniors today. The crowd chuckled. Jessica did not. Wren had turned his head away from the stage toward the donation table, his ears lifted, his nose moved once, then again. The same change passed through him that Jessica had felt in Walter's garden, in Mabel's kitchen, behind North Star Pharmacy, and inside Care Halo's warehouse. Not alarm. Recognition. Ward? Bell asked quietly. Jessica followed Wren as he moved through the edge of the crowd toward a wooden donation box placed beside the stage steps. It was painted white, decorated with blue ribbon, and labeled, "For Our Forgotten Seniors." Wren stopped in front of it and sat staring not at the words, but at the lower seam where the lid met the frame. He could not read. He did not understand charity slogans, but he knew paper, ink, packing tape, warehouse dust, and the faint stale odor of documents that had been handled by nervous hands. Bell gave a small signal. Under the existing search authorization, 2 agents stepped in and opened the box. On top were envelopes, checks, and folded bills. Beneath them, hidden under a false cardboard bottom, lay a packet of documents bound with a rubber band. Jessica saw names before she saw anything else: Walter Cole, Mabel Henson, Eleanor Price, and dozens more. Beside Walter's name was a typed note, "Family Military Connection, avoid direct pressure." Ethan saw it over Jessica's shoulder. His face changed, not with rage this time, but with something quieter and deeper. They had known he existed. They had known Walter had a Navy SEAL grandson. That was why they had smiled softer, called gentler, and used church trust instead of open pressure. Jessica looked at Walter. The old man's eyes were wet, but his chin lifted. Bell touched his earpiece. "Move." Hollis had just begun his speech. "We care for our elders because they carried us first." The microphone went silent. Federal agents stepped calmly onto the stage and through the crowd. No panic, no spectacle, only the firm arrival of consequences. Mercer's face lost its color. Lydia lowered her eyes. Victor looked toward the alley and found another agent already there. Hollis kept smiling for 3 more seconds, perhaps the longest 3 seconds of his life. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, but his voice no longer belonged to the man on the banner. Walter asked Ethan to roll him closer. Jessica almost stopped them, but Belle gave a slight nod. Hollis looked down at the old man he had turned into a line item. Walter's voice was soft frayed, but clear enough for those nearby to hear. "You should have asked for help before you learned to steal kindness." Afterward, the town square seemed to exhale. Some seniors cried quietly. Others sat very still, looking at the blue Mercy Bridge shirts as if waking from a long dream. Paula Wynne stood near the church tent, hands clasped, her iron-gray hair moving in the wind. When Jessica met her eyes, Paula nodded once. It was not victory. It was relief with sorrow still stitched into it. By late afternoon, the square was nearly empty. Belle stood beside Jessica while agents carried sealed boxes to waiting vehicles. "Your dog found the first door," he said. "You were smart enough not to kick it open too soon." Jessica looked down at Rin, who was watching a child drop a pie crust crumb near the curb with great professional interest. "He would like that compliment in pastry form," she said. Belle almost smiled. Almost. The final scene came 2 days later in Walter's garden. Ethan repaired the back gate with quiet, steady hands. Walter sat beneath the apple tree, a blanket over his knees, watching him like a man trying not to give too much advice. Jessica placed Walter's corrected medications, verified by his real doctor, on the kitchen table. Rin lay under the tree where the false packages had once been hidden, eyes half closed, nose twitching in the scent of new soil and apple buds. Belle came by for a final statement and stood awkwardly near the porch until Walter handed him a paper bag of sugar, free apple turnovers. Belle accepted it with the solemn care of a man receiving classified evidence. Ethan coughed to hide a laugh. Jessica failed to hide hers. That evening Jessica opened her small notebook and wrote one line. "Some lies hide in paper. Some truths still come home on 4 paws." In the garden that had once hidden false medicine, there was only fresh earth, young apples, and the peaceful breathing of a sleeping dog. Walter was no longer a line in a file. He was a grandfather, a neighbor, and a name returned to where it belonged. In the end, this story reminds us that evil does not always arrive with a loud voice. Sometimes it arrives with a smile, a form to sign, a free gift, or a promise that sounds too kind to question. Walter Cole was not harmed because he was weak. He was harmed because he trusted people who wore the face of kindness while hiding selfishness behind paper, money, and power. But the story also reminds us of something brighter. A person's name is more than ink on a file. An old man is not a number. A grandmother is not a claim. A lonely neighbor is not a chance for someone else to profit. Every life carries a history, a family, a dignity, and a soul that deserves respect. And sometimes God sends help in ways we do not expect. In this story, help came through a loyal German shepherd named Rin. He could not read a Medicare form. He could not understand a bank record, but he could sense what people tried to hide. He noticed the wrong smell, the wrong box, the wrong silence. Maybe that is one of the quiet miracles of life. While humans often look for truth in big places, God may place it in the faithful heart of a dog standing beside us. Animals are not just companions, they are guardians of tenderness. They remind us to slow down, to listen, to care, and to notice the forgotten. A dog does not ask how rich someone is. A dog does not care about titles, power, or polished speeches. A dog knows loyalty, presence, and love. And in a world where many people are too busy to notice pain, that kind of love can feel like heaven touching the earth. So may we learn from Walter's garden. Check on the elderly neighbor who lives alone. Call the parent or grandparent who says, "I'm fine," a little too quickly. Read the paperwork they are too embarrassed to question. Be patient with those who move slower than we do, and never make someone feel ashamed for needing help. May we also learn from Jessica and Ethan. Anger can rise when someone we love is hurt, but wisdom teaches us to do what is right, not only what feels powerful. True strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is standing still, telling the truth, protecting the vulnerable, and letting justice arrive the right way. And may we learn from Rin, love pays attention. Loyalty does not walk away. Sometimes, the smallest sign, a sealed box, a nervous glance, a dog refusing to move, can become the beginning of justice. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who loves animals, honors the elderly, or still believes kindness matters. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from, or share the name of an animal who once changed your life. And if you want more stories about loyalty, healing, faith, and the bond between humans and animals, please subscribe to the channel. May God bless you, protect your family, comfort your heart, and watch over every loyal animal walking beside someone in need.